Leo Vargas sat on the hard wooden chair, his calloused hands trembling. He was an island in this sea of youthful prodigies. The girls wore expensive dresses, the boys tailored suits. Leo looked down at his own clothes, the clean but faded janitor's uniform he'd worn to his night shift, a pair of worn-out work boots. He held his sheet music, the pages soft and wrinkled from countless nights of practice in a forgotten storage room. This was the Royal Music Conservatory, the most famous music school in the city. Leo knew its halls better than anyone, but not as a musician. He was the janitor. Every night, after the students and faculty had gone home, he would mop these gleaming marble floors and dust the gilded frames of the portraits that lined the walls. His job was to make the world of the privileged shine, a world he could only observe from the shadows. His daughter, 6-year-old Maya, was the reason he was here. She was his entire world. A single dad since his wife had passed 2 years ago, Leo worked the night shift at the conservatory and a weekend job stocking shelves just to keep their tiny apartment and put food on the table. Maya was a bright, happy child who loved to draw. Her latest masterpiece was taped to their fridge, a drawing of Leo sitting at a huge piano, with the words "My Daddy the Piano Man" scrawled underneath. That drawing was his courage. He discovered music by accident. One night, while cleaning, he'd heard a student practicing the most beautiful piano piece he'd ever heard. The sound followed him, and a deep, forgotten longing awoke in his heart. A few weeks later, he found it, an old, dusty upright piano tucked away in a storage room, out of tune and with a few sticky keys. It became his secret. After his shift, he would slip into the storage room and teach himself to play, using videos he watched on the library computer during his lunch breaks. His secret wasn't a secret for long. An old man, a retired orchestra musician named Mr. Rodriguez who volunteered at the conservatory, found him one night. Instead of reporting him, Mr. Rodriguez saw the raw, untamed talent in Leo's playing. He began mentoring him, staying late to teach him theory and technique. "Leo," he'd said 3 months ago, "your hands, your soul. They were made for this." The conservatory gives out one Artist of Promised scholarship each year. It's for unconventional talent. You have to try. So here he was, a 28-year-old janitor, waiting to audition against children who had been taking lessons since they were toddlers. He heard them whispering about their grand pianos and their famous teachers. One boy bragged about performing at Carnegie Hall. Leo felt a familiar sting of inadequacy. He was from Oak Street, the poorest part of the city. He was out of place. A tall woman in a black dress emerged from the audition room. After a few more names, she called out, "Leo Vargas." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood up, acutely aware of the whispers that followed him. "Isn't that the janitor?" someone asked. He pretended not to hear, took a deep breath, and opened the door to his future. The audition room was vast. In the center sat the biggest, shiniest grand piano Leo had ever seen. 3 people sat behind a long table. The man in the middle, with silver hair and an expensive suit, radiated an aura of immense importance. "I am Director Vladimir Petrov," the man said, his voice thick with a Russian accent. He looked at Leo's application, his lip curling in disdain. "Leo Vargas. Age 28. Occupation: janitor. Here at the conservatory." When he said the word "the janitor," the other 2 judges exchanged a look of disbelief. "Tell me about your musical training," Petrov said, leaning back as if preparing for a joke. Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm mostly self-taught, sir. I practice on an old piano in one of the storage rooms." "Storage room B, I presume?" Petrov asked with a cruel smirk. "The one with the broken soundboard." He turned to the other judges. "And your teacher?" "Mr. Rodriguez helps me," Leo said. "He used to play for the city orchestra." Director Petrov let out a short, sharp laugh. "The city orchestra? How quaint. And I suppose you learned from YouTube videos?" Leo's face burned with humiliation. It was true. "Some videos, yes," he admitted. Petrov shook his head, a look of theatrical pity on his face. Every year we get these dreamers. They think passion is a substitute for decades of proper training. He gestured around the room. This is the Royal Music Conservatory. We do not hand out scholarships based on sentimental stories. A woman with red hair, one of the other judges, seemed to take pity on him. What pieces have you prepared for us, Mr. Vargas? Leo looked at his sheet music, his choices suddenly feeling foolish. Mozart Sonata in C major, and he hesitated. And what? Petrov prodded, enjoying his discomfort. And Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Leo added quickly. The first movement. The room went utterly silent. Then, Director Petrov began to laugh. It wasn't a small chuckle, it was a deep, booming laugh that filled the entire hall. This is unbelievable, he wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. A janitor who practices on a broken piano in a closet thinks he can play one of the most technically and emotionally demanding pieces ever written. Leo felt the room spin. This was a mistake. He should never have come. Petrov stood up, his tall frame looming over Leo. Young man, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, Rachmaninoff's second concerto is played by masters. The hand stretches alone are impossible for most pianists. I know it's difficult, Leo said, his voice shaking. But I've been practicing. Practicing on a toy, you mean? Petrov scoffed. He walked over to the magnificent piano and patted its gleaming surface. This is a Steinway Model D Concert Grand. It is nothing like the piece of junk you play on. It will expose every flaw in your technique. He walked back to his chair, a malicious glint in his eye. He wanted to make an example of Leo. But please, he said with false sincerity. Show us. Show us how a janitor from Oak Street can play Rachmaninoff. He paused, a wicked idea forming. In fact, Petrov announced loudly, his voice carrying through the door to the waiting room, if this man can actually play piano, real piano, not just banging on keys, I will kneel. Right here, in front of everyone. I will get down on my knees in this room. The other judges looked horrified. Vladimir, that's not necessary, the red-haired woman began. I mean it, Petrov interrupted. The threat hung in the air, a public declaration of Leo's impending failure. The fear in Leo's chest was still there, but now, a hot surge of anger rose to meet it. Who was this man to judge his life? To mock his dreams? Leo thought of Maya. He thought of her unwavering belief in her piano man daddy. He thought of Mr. Rodriguez, who saw past his uniform to the musician beneath. He would not be shamed. He would not be broken. Leo walked to the piano bench. His legs felt weak, but his resolve was iron. He sat down, adjusted the height, and placed his hands on the cool ivory keys. They felt solid, alive, perfect. He looked up at Director Petrov, who was still standing with his arms crossed, that cruel smile plastered on his face, waiting for the humiliation to begin. Leo turned back to the piano. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pictured Maya's drawing. It was time to show them what a janitor could do. Leo pressed the first key. The sound that bloomed from the Steinway was richer and deeper than anything he had ever produced. It was a sound he had only heard in his dreams. He played the opening chord slowly, letting the piano's soul resonate through the hall. The melody was simple, but it held the weight of all his struggles, his quiet hopes, and his fierce love for his daughter. Behind him, the room was completely still. Director Petrov's cruel smile had frozen on his face. This wasn't the clumsy banging he had expected. This was music. As the piece began to build, Leo forgot where he was. He forgot the arrogant director, the whispering students, his worn-out uniform. There was only the story the music was telling, a story of hardship and hope, of finding beauty in the darkest of places. It was his story. His fingers, strengthened by years of manual labor, moved across the keys with a power and dexterity that shocked the judges. The difficult stretches Petrov had mocked were made possible by his unusually large hands. The music swelled, filling the enormous room, his left hand rolling through powerful chords while his right hand sang the heartbreakingly beautiful melody. This piano was an extension of his soul. Every nuance he felt, every emotion he wanted to convey, the instrument responded perfectly. The quiet, sad passages sounded like the lonely nights after his wife was gone, with only the hum of the floor polisher for company. The powerful, triumphant part sounded like the moment he first saw Maya's face, a love so fierce it could conquer anything. Director Petrov's mouth hung open. The smugness had vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He had built his career on identifying talent, on separating the pretenders from the prodigies. He had never been this wrong. The technique Leo displayed was extraordinary, but it was the emotion that was shattering all of Petrov's preconceived notions. This janitor wasn't just playing notes, he was breathing life into them. In the waiting room, the chatter had died. The young prodigies were pressed against the wall, listening in stunned silence. They recognized the piece. They knew its impossible difficulty. And they knew the music pouring through the walls was on a level most of them would never achieve, despite their years of expensive lessons. Back in the audition room, Leo reached one of the most challenging sections. His hands had to move with lightning speed in opposite directions. It was a passage that had taken him months to master on his clumsy upright piano. But here, on this perfect instrument, his fingers flew. The music was a storm of passion and determination, the sound of a man who refused to be defined by his circumstances. Petrov was pale, gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. Everything he believed about class, training, and privilege was being dismantled, note by note. This performance was an indictment of his own prejudice. The woman with red hair had tears streaming down her face. She had judged thousands of auditions, but this was something else entirely. This was art in its purest form. Leo played on, lost in a world of sound. He poured every ounce of his life into the performance, the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, the joy of hearing Maya laugh, the quiet dignity of a man determined to build a better life for his child. The music soared, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As the first movement neared its earth-shattering climax, everyone in the room held their breath. They knew they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just an audition, it was a revelation. Leo played the final thunderous chords, and the sound hung in the air, vibrating with an almost physical intensity. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence filled with the ghost of the music and the weight of what had just happened. Leo sat at the piano, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. He finally turned to face the judges, his face filled with nervous uncertainty. "I'm sorry if I made any mistakes," he said quietly. His simple words broke the spell. The red-haired judge let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. Director Petrov tried to stand, but his legs were unsteady. He gripped the table for support, his face a mask of awe and deep, profound shame. He looked at Leo, the janitor he had mocked, and saw not a menial worker, but an artist of staggering talent. Slowly, painfully, Petrov walked toward the piano. He was thinking of the cruel, arrogant promise he had made. If this man can actually play piano, I will kneel. He stopped a few feet from Leo. "Young man," Petrov said, his voice cracking. That was the most beautiful piano playing I have ever heard in this room." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with Leo's. "Before you played, I made a promise. I made it because I was certain you would fail. I judged you based on your uniform, your address, your job. I was wrong. Completely, shamefully wrong." Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, director Vladimir Petrov, the titan of the classical music world, slowly lowered himself to his knees on the marble floor. His pride, his reputation, all of it dissolved in this single act of humility. "I kneel before your talent," Petrov said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up at Leo. "And I kneel to ask for your forgiveness." Leo was stunned. He quickly slid off the bench and knelt too, so they were at eye level. "Sir, you don't have to do this." "Yes," Petrov insisted, tears now flowing freely. "I do. What matters is the gift you have. A gift that transcends everything I thought was important. Director Petrov stood, helping Leo to his feet. Mr. Vargas, he said formally, on behalf of the Royal Music Conservatory, it would be our profound honor to offer you the Artist of Promised scholarship. It covers full tuition, housing, and a living stipend. I also want to personally oversee your education. I want to help you share your gift with the world. Leo couldn't speak. He just nodded, his own eyes filling with tears of relief and joy. He thought of Maya. He could finally give her the life she deserved. A few months later, Leo walked through the conservatory halls not as a janitor, but as its most celebrated new student. The story of his audition had become a legend. Director Petrov, a changed and humbled man, had established new outreach programs to find talent in underserved communities, determined that no one like Leo would ever be overlooked again. That evening, Leo was performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, this time as the featured soloist with the Conservatory Orchestra. The hall was sold out. In the front row sat Mr. Rodriguez, beaming with pride. Beside him was Maya, wearing a new dress, her eyes wide with wonder. As Leo sat at the grand piano, under the warm glow of the stage lights, he looked out at his daughter. She held up a new drawing she'd made that afternoon. It was him, on a big stage, with a huge smile. Underneath, she had written, "My daddy is the piano king." Leo smiled back, a wave of love and gratitude washing over him. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that filled the concert hall was more than just a performance. It was a promise fulfilled, the beautiful, triumphant sound of a dream that had refused to die.